I mean, what it seems like is that there's some kind of concerted effort, in the Muslim community, either in America or abroad, that is hell bent on stifling that part of Islam and putting on this face of Islam that where you don't beat women, but at the same time you actually, I mean, like they acknowledge, yeah, it does say that you can beat women, but to everybody, like it's two faced. I think is what
Hmm.
you had said. So yeah, that's very odd. Um,
And there is a concerted effort. That's, remember what I said? The end goal of Islam is to take over the world.
right. Yeah, I know there's I remember I wasn't able to find it when I was on the phone today, but I remember reading a few specific verses that was talking about how the end goal of Islam being, like, everybody being Islam, and how it's not gonna, like, this world's not gonna be right or something until everybody's in Islam. Everybody
Yeah.
is in
There won't be
Islam.
peace until every last person is Muslim, and that means dead or Muslim, one or the
Right.
other.
Now, I generally, when I talk about Islam, I've always referred to it as, like, Islam is very in group, like, religion, and everybody else is out group. So, like, if you're not Muslim, then you're considered an infidel. I mean, that's correct, right?
Correct. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So, like, I have, in comparison with that with the Bible, see, like, a lot of the laws in the Bible are concerned with in group, like, relations
Right.
with each other, right? And I'm wondering if that's the same thing as it is in Islam, because, like, you hear Kareem or other so-called moderate Muslims, they say stuff like, to kill another person is to kill all of humanity, when they get brought up with the whole, Islam calls you to kill people. Um, and I'm kind of curious if that means, like, if that's a rule for the in group and does not include, like, the out group.
Well, yeah, exactly. It is. It says right there that for just the believers, it puts it right there in black and white. These are rules for the believers. Anyone else, it's open. It's like that's how rape is okay and slavery is okay, because they're the coffers.
Right. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, that's where that's another area where the doublespeak, pops up, this ambiguity, because, like, in a lot of Karim's videos, he says that, Islam's a religion of peace. And he spouts off the whole, kill another person is blah blah blah. But that only concerns with other Muslims, and even then, that in and of itself is subjective as to who you consider to be a Muslim.
Right. Well,
And
your sect, you have all there's 73 different sects of Islam. So you have, it's not just Sunnis and Shias. So if you only are going to identify with your group, which, I was Sunni, but what kind of Sunni, or if you're Shia, do you know what I mean? We hated the Shias. We had friends that were Shias we weren't allowed to be friends with because they were Shias. Like, we had to hide our friendship, which is crazy. So even this whole thing about, Islam taking over the world, everything will be peaceful. You're going to have fighting between the sects. That's why the Shia mosques got hit in Saudi. I had Muslims arguing with me that it wasn't Islamic terrorism because they set off bombs and hurt people in Saudi. I'm like, yeah, but it was Shia. Wahhabis are Sunnis, and you're talking about they hit Shia mosques or outside the Shia mosque. That's why. But, though it couldn't be a Muslim because Muslims don't attack Muslims. Well, that's bullshit.
well,
That's what I
yeah,
mean. The doublespeak and lies.
right. So, are the sects comparable to denominations in Christianity?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. Because I mean, I can definitely see, because here, at least in Christianity, you have a lot of Christians that are like, well, those aren't real Christians if they practice it this way,
Hmm.
and that's, of course, just a no true Scotsman fallacy. So I was kind of curious if that was just another way to do the no true Scotsman fallacy. Them, like Kareem, or the woman that I was on the phone with today. When I brought up radical Islam, she immediately stops me, didn't let me continue, and said, "There is no radical Islam."
Oh my gosh. Oh,
And
that's infuriating.
and I immediately said, okay, well, are you going to say that that Westboro Baptist Church isn't Christian? And she's like, look, I'm not going to say who's Christian or who isn't Christian or who isn't Muslim. And I'm just sitting there like, you just told me that these people aren't Muslim.
I'd be like, lady, you are so full of shit right now. That whenever I argue with them and they sit there and they start off by trying to, because they see my skin color and they think, well, you can't be a Muslim. I get told that I'm well, you're a fake ex-Muslim because you're white. I'm like, you're a racist. But they tell me that it's the exact same thing, dude. Oh
I find it amazing the amount of doublespeak in Islam, because I mean, I've primarily been focused on Christianity for the past few years and only really started looking into Islam and its intricacies. But it just seems like there's just a lot of denial and doublespeak.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, don't lie to me, because as soon as I'm like, I'm an ex-Muslim and you can't lie to me. Yeah, the amounts of debates that I have almost on a daily basis, and I get tired of throwing out Quran verse after Quran verse, and I won't see people who have no experience with Islam and they've read a book, say political Islam, what's his name, Bill Warner, that say somebody's read that book and they've read the Quran and maybe they've read a couple hadiths and they're knowledgeable, they got they kind of know what they're doing. They don't understand, like they don't really get how they lie. So they focus on the wrong things. Like say there's a hadith, I guess I could put it better. There's a hadith out there that talks about how to have sex with babies. Right?
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Well, Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6. And they consummated the marriage sometime around the age of 9. There's hadiths, because it being with little boys wasn't unheard of back then either. But yeah, there is hadiths that exist that talks about, it's called thighing, where he would get off in between the girl's thighs. And it exists, but I don't know if the hadith is sound. And sound meaning there are hadiths that are accepted and widely used, and that they have some kind of historical significance, and because even the I think just like the Bible, certain books were written after Muhammad died. After Jesus passed, there's hundreds of years later, right? That's the way it is with the Bible.
Yeah, especially Mormonism.
Oh yeah. So you have the same thing with the Quran and Hadith. It's hundreds of years later, or with the change in leadership, or with anyway. So you've got the differences, and they use the wrong Hadith. So they argue, say, with that thighing Hadith. I don't think that's a real Hadith, but it's brought up all the time in arguments. I could be wrong, but from what I've tried to ascertain whether it's real or not that it hasn't been brought out for several hundred years. It could be a really old hadith. It could be 1,400 years old or 1,200 years old, but it doesn't mean that it really was something that was used, if that makes sense. So I try to focus on the things that are generally widely accepted as the books and the hadiths, because you have different translations of the Quran, which we talked about, and you have different hadiths. So I try to focus on the main ones. My whole point was, you have people that don't really understand Islam, and they haven't lived it, and they haven't, not that they shouldn't be able to argue it, but sometimes their arguments focus on fake shit when they really could focus on real shit, is, I guess, my bottom line. So I hear a lot of times, like with the thighing hadith, that people throwing that out at Muslims, and so I have to debate with them all the time and counter all of that other stuff and just be like, no, we're going to, if you want to debate me, we're going to focus on the Quran. We can go into hadith, but it basically, because they always argue, well, that hadith wasn't sound, or that hadith, I'm talking about al-Bukhari, that is sound, but they still will argue because they lie. So, it's when arguing and debating with Muslims, it's really good to just focus on the Quran. Because if you focus on other things, they can always throw back at you that it's not sound. You can't, as you know, they do it with the Quran. Well, that translation isn't the right translation. But you really can't argue the Quran. Like in black and white, you can't say, well, that's not in the Quran. Well, yes, it is. It's right there. With hadith, you can argue more. That's just my one frustration that I see a lot. And the other thing is people arguing that, a follower of mine argued that rape culture doesn't exist, or talk about how men have it worse in Saudi or in the Middle East than women do under Islam. Absolutely, men have it worse in the West. They're with child custody cases and child support and sentencing when you break the law. Everything is against men in the West. But when we're talking about under Islam and in Islamic countries, absolutely not the case. So I find I get really frustrated when you have every walk of life, it seems like, apologizing for Islam when it suits their narrative. The MRAs want to talk about how it's not really that bad for women. Islamic misogyny doesn't exist. Then you have the regressives apologizing for Islam, saying it's not the religion. Not every Muslim's a terrorist. It's culture. So it gets incredibly frustrating as an ex-Muslim and somebody who's lived it. And I want to scream and I want to say, you don't understand. I feel like everyone is bent over with their ass in the air, begging to be pegged by Islam. Oh, please, please, please. And I'm watching it happen. And all the ex-Muslims that I know, we're all standing and watching it happen. And we feel incredibly helpless because nobody's listening to us. Especially regressives who tell us, no, it's not really like that. That's not what Islam is. Like, are you seriously going to tell me you know better what Islam is? Like, so it gets frustrating. And I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Well, I guess I'm kind of curious how it makes you feel whenever you hear somebody say that, oh, that's not really Islam, or that's not really Muslim, or something like that. Like in the context of what you've experienced over in the East or European countries or whatnot. Like, I'm wondering, how does that make you feel whenever you hear somebody kind of invalidate your experience like that?
Oh, it's infuriating. Just, all of us ex-Muslims are a little tight-knit community and group, and, the Reddit and our videos, and we have hangouts and group chats, and just the same sentiment echoed with all of us is when I say that we feel like we're screaming into the wind, literally that's how it feels. And it makes me angry and sad. But at the same time, I'm really insulted. It's somebody, when I lived under Sharia, wore niqab, I watched people die. I watched a beheading. I watched a stoning, and for infidelity. And you want to tell me as a Western person who's never lived Islam, who's never been over in those countries, who maybe read the Quran, did some hangouts with people online, you want to tell me how it is. It's so incredibly insulting. And some days, like I feel so passionately about it. I started speaking out online about it when things started getting worse. I'm watching all these terrorist attacks, and I'm watching social justice lawyers and regressives make excuses, and going up until the upper echelons of government making excuses for Islam and not refusing to call it what it is. It's Islam, and there's extremism, but even refusing to call it Islamic terrorism. So I felt like I had to open my mouth and say something. But at the same time, there are some days I feel like it's useless. Like, I don't want to sound conspiracy theory, one of those wacko people, but it seems like this entire thing is orchestrated. It seems like nobody's doing anything about it, and it's almost like they want it to happen because it's very obvious I would think, especially to the people in power, what's going on and how Islam is slowly creeping its way in and taking over politically and even in this country. There's a danger of it. We're safer here than anywhere else. But there are days I feel like, why the fuck do I even bother? Y'all want it anyway. Why am I wasting my time? I put my life in danger every time I do it. And that's the other thing. I get angry. These fucking asshats who have never lived Islam, who want to tell me how and what Islam is, those of us that put our lives on the line, as an ex-Muslim, you cannot publicly say you are an ex-Muslim and not risk your life, even in America. Like I said, I have issues to this day. My tires were just popped and my window just broken just in this last month for being an ex-Muslim because they found me again. We put our lives on the line to speak out, and you want to tell me I'm wrong or I don't know, I don't understand. I risk that every day. So it's like I said, it's almost like I want to say, fuck you. Fine. You know?
No, yeah, I completely understand. And I don't think that's as conspiracy theorist as you think, because I mean, just in what we've talked about, here, I mean, what you have are these Muslims that are wanting to put have a public face of Islam that, isn't about violence, that isn't, where you can beat, your wives or whatnot. Just generally the happy-go-lucky Islam. They're wanting to put that out there. And then I think what may be happening is the SJW crowd or, the regressive left, they see this and they see others that are saying things that are different than that. And so they're like, oh, here's a cause that we can jump on and we can complain about online. And then it just kind of explodes from there. You have these people that have created this movement or this kind of barrier, that's supporting the lies, that these others are telling. And, all the while, they're being fooled. It seems to me. And so while they're sitting there cheering for what they perceive to be some kind of moral good, it's actually not. It's actually hurting, like, the community at large.
And they're kind of signing their own death warrant.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's quite literally. It'll come to be a day where it's like, okay, look, you've helped us take over everything. Now you've got to convert, or we're just going to kill you.
People don't understand jihad means like inner, like, struggle. There's inner and outer jihad. There's greater and lesser jihad. And when I had an argument about this recently, when I say jihad, it evokes pictures of wars and, the jihadis, the terrorists, but jihad is very much political. It's very quiet. You're taught that that's the most important jihad. That's why a lot of the Muslims are against the terrorist organizations. They're not against jihad, but that form of jihad, they're against it. But jihad in and of itself is something that every Muslim supports. You have to. So when I explain that, people will argue with me and tell me I don't understand what jihad is. No. Jihad is also an inner struggle, and it's very, very political. That's the jihad I'm worried about. I am worried about terrorist attacks, of course. We all are. But I'm more worried about, like I was saying, slowly creeping into government offices and making it where, like in the UK, where Sharia courts are becoming more and more common. And it's slow and it's insidious. You make more Muslim babies. I made 2 Muslim babies. And you take over, and eventually, if they have their way, these countries will be just like their countries. But people don't see that. They see jihad equals violence, And absolutely, that's the tiny part of jihad.
Yeah, well, honestly, I had no idea the intricacies of the topic of jihad. So I mean, um, so yeah, I mean, it kind of seems like a common theme in Islam, though, to have like differing opinions on what is jihad, what isn't jihad, from within the Muslim community itself.
Yeah, well, no, everyone agrees what jihad is, like that, because you're basically defending your faith and spreading it, because that's what's necessary. Again, that's the end goal of Islam. But the argument is what the necessary jihad is. So, like, obviously, Muslims aren't gonna even like I may come from my ex's family, very extreme, very extreme. But even they wouldn't be pro blowing up innocent children in the name of Islam. However, the caveat is, again, it wouldn't have happened if Allah didn't will it. Not that they would hope that would happen, but if it happened and he was allowed to be successful, the person who killed these kids, then Allah willed it. So there must have been a greater reason for it. So it's it's being two-faced. It's disgusting, but they can justify things that way. So it's go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, it's jihad. So the agreement, like every Muslim knows there's greater and lesser jihad, but how? Yeah, the argument is how to carry it out, basically.
Okay, I'm kind of curious. Is that the argument that I guess ISIS uses, like in their attacks? That their attacks wouldn't be successful if Allah didn't want it to happen.
Well, yeah, that's one of the ways that they justify it. Of course, yeah. Because if not that, well, they do believe that Allah is saying that you have to kill these people because they want to be martyred, and in order to be martyred, you have to take out the kuffar, right? So, and when you see these interviews with these guys, obviously they're smiling and they can't wait to get to Jannah, and they believe, those jihadis believe that that's the only way that they're going to be able to get to paradise. But it's not that every Muslim would support it. But the justification is, like I said, if Allah didn't want it to happen, it wouldn't have been successful. Something could have gone wrong.
Yeah, well, see, when I bring this up to, Muslims that are defending the faith, I mean, they just simply passed off as, well, they're not really following Islam.
Yeah, I like that. Because they went and they, like, that particular Muslim dude might have been gay, right? Or they drank and they smoked, like the no true Scotsman fallacy. But even more so, it explains it. Because if you're sinning and you're doing bad things and you can't control yourself, then you're going to want to do whatever you can to get in the best graces of Allah, which is to be a martyr. And Muslims can justify any of this because we are at war. So all those passages in the Quran, all those surahs that talk about not killing people, it's in times of peace or in times of war. And since that's why they talk about the West, attacking them. We are at war with Islam. So anything, they can justify anything, any act, no matter how disgusting, abhorrent, immoral it is, it's justified because it's a time of war. So the whole thing, like, before they go out and they become martyrs, they go and they sin even more. Because when you are a martyr, your heavenly rewards are, I think they're doubled or tripled. I can't remember what the hadith says. But it's like you get extra reward points and you go to extra super special heaven. Like they believe the second they die and they open their eyes, they're going to be in paradise. And because they killed all those people, if that makes sense.